Last year, I went on long service leave for 11 weeks, and much of that meant being away from Hobart and meeting lots of people who had no idea who I was, and at some point during the conversation, the obvious question would come up, "So what do you do?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm an Anglican priest." Now, if you've never tried that as a conversation starter, try it. If you're at a party somewhere and somebody says, "Well, what do you do?" Try it. So say, "I'm an Anglican priest." It's a real conversation stopper. You can see them thinking, "Have I been swearing? How much have I been drinking? Did I confess to adultery? What's going on?" But as a marriage celebrant, one of my jobs is to ask people, "What do you do?" We have to fill it out on the form, and they usually write it in. And when I started being a celebrant, you'd have sensible things like doctor, builder, teacher. But these days you get a rather bewildering set of descriptions. Influencer, risk systems consultant, pedagogical programmer. To which normally that means when I see their occupation on the form, I have to go, "What do you do? What does that actually mean? What is it that you do?" Well, in our reading from Matthew's Gospel today, Jesus gives his followers their job description. But when we see what that job description is, we're likely to mean, "What does that mean we do?" We are to be salt and light. But what does that mean? Our reading from chapter 5 of Matthew comes partway through the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus has just given the Beatitudes. Blessed are all these people who follow in the ways of God, the poor in spirit, the meek, the humble, and so on. He has said that you have the kingdom now and you will have the kingdom in its fullness in the future. But he's warned them that the world may not like it and the world may be against them and persecute them. But now he says, this is actually what you, my followers, will do to the world. They are to be salt and light. And you might like to have Matthew 5 in front of you. It's on page 7 of the service sheets. We are told at the beginning of that reading that the followers are to be the salt of the earth. We should note immediately that this is a very definite statement. In the Greek, it cannot be more emphatic. It is not "you ought to be the salt of the earth." It's not "you should be the salt of the earth." It's not "you have the potential to be the salt of the earth." It's not "have you considered a career in sodium chloride?" It's "you are the salt of the earth." Saltiness is a given of the follower of Jesus. It is to be of our very nature and the core of what we do. We are not to be Christians with added salt. Christians are the salt of the earth. Furthermore, it's quite a specific task. You are not to be a salt. We are not one amongst many condiments. We are the salt. That which the world needs is to be found in the church. We are the salt. And lastly, we need to remember that it is the salt of the earth. It is for all people. Now, we need to realise what an incredible statement that is. The great dignity that we have, that we're given by Jesus as a job for the world. To all of us, to each of us. Now, the problem, before we get a little too carried away with the importance, therefore, I'm the salt of the earth. Yes, got a job to do. We need to realise that, of course, salt has very little value of itself. I don't know if you've ever gone to somebody's house for dinner and just after the meal's been served and you're all going, "Gosh, the salt was great, wasn't it? Really set everything off. I'm really glad they had that kind of," well, unless it's chicken salt, of course, which is one of the great inventions of the human culture. But in general, you don't talk about the salt, do you? You talk about the meal. The salt is there for the meal. It is there for the benefit of the food. Salt exists for the food. Likewise, we are to be there for the earth. We are there for the benefit of the earth. There is much more to being a follower of Jesus than just being saved. As wonderful as that is, he has work for us to do. He has work for each of us to do. We are all to be the salt of the earth. But what does that actually mean, to be the salt of the earth? Well, salt has two functions. It's either to improve the taste, but more commonly in those times, before refrigerators, it was a preservative. Now, this stops us from getting confused by some people this morning raised with me, well, if you put too much salt in something, you ruin it. So, what do we do? Does that mean we shouldn't be too Christian? Well, no, because if you're thinking about preservative, there's never enough salt. The more salt there is, the more preserved that it is. That's the most likely metaphor that Jesus is running with. The followers of Jesus are to act in preserving the good in the community. When you describe somebody as the salt of the earth, we usually mean by that they are somebody who is humble, who is honest, and they are good. That's not a bad start, is it? If you're going to think about what it means to be the salt of the earth. Humble, honest, and good. But we can push it further. We can go deeper. Because Jesus has just given the Beatitudes. And that means we can have salt with more bite as we think about what's said here. We can be saltier because Christians are to be meek. They are to be searching for righteousness. They are to be merciful. They are to be givers of comfort. They are to be doing all these things for the good of those who are around them. And when we do this, we are preserving and working for the good in our society. Or we could look at our reading from Isaiah, where the believers, the ancient people of God, were wanting God to bless them, but they weren't actually doing any of the things that he wanted them to do. Rather than just going to church and looking religious, they would be people who loosed the bonds of injustice, fed the hungry, housed the homeless, and clothed the naked. As a sort of side point, it's worth pointing out that Jesus, if you go into the end of this passage, makes it very clear that the Old Testament has ongoing relevance as to what it means to be salty. Not one jot or tittle, to use the old language, of the law will disappear. It's all there to help us be salty, what it looks like for the ongoing life of faith. Yes, the teaching of Jesus is the lens through which we see the Old Testament, but too often we think the lens of Jesus makes we look completely away from the Old Testament. The Old Testament is there, the ancient scriptures are there to help shape us, shape our lives, and to keep things salty. One of the ways that we will lose our saltiness is if we stop listening to all that God has to say to us in the scriptures. Because Jesus ominously does go on to say that salt that is not doing its job is worthless. Now, I have to say, the internet is an amazing thing. It's amazing the sites that you find. I Googled losing its saltiness to find there is an entire site dedicated to the wonders of salt and how amazing and great salt is. And one of the amazing things about salt, and it's very clear on this website, is salt never loses its taste, its saltiness, just doesn't do it. Salt is an amazing thing. It just always stays salty. So what is Jesus talking about when the internet says you can't lose your saltiness? And of course you believe everything that's on the internet. That should have got some response. But in those days, salt wasn't pure. So as things got humid and dehumid, the salt would leach out, leaving you with the impure stuff that was left, which was tasteless and useless, and the only thing you could do with it was to throw it away and trample it underfoot. It was good for nothing. If we feel that the church is being trampled underfoot, could it be because we've lost our saltiness? Could it be that we are not listening to what Jesus has to say and we've lost our calling as followers of Jesus? This is supposed to be the year of the Lord's flavour, but we've become the Salvation Army bland. Our doctors may say that less salt is good, but theologically and missiologically, we need more salt. Not for our good, but for the good of those around us. Being salty will not just help preserve our community, it will also make it taste better. So that's the first thing we are to be. We are to be salt. Secondly, we are to be the light of the world. Now, once again, it's an emphatic, distinctive role given to Christians. The light of the world. But the sphere is now made clearer. It is the world, or the cosmos in Greek. It's a universal statement. We are to bring light to the world. It's not a surprise if Jesus is the light of the world and he gives us that light, we then become the light of the world. It's an extraordinary thing to say to this small group of believers of a Galilean carpenter, you have a cosmic role in bringing light to all people into the darkness of the world. And of course, it does make an implied difference between the follower of Jesus, has the light, and those who don't, the world which is in darkness. It's an extraordinary privilege that is given to each of us here. Each one of us is called to be the light of the world. Now, we might think, well, what does that mean? It might give the idea of security. That's perhaps what Jesus is getting at, the idea of a city on a hill, a beacon, a safe place, a place that you can go for safety. It also is much more domestic, that idea of a lamp in the household that brings light to the whole house. But we notice again that light is for the benefit of others. As with salt, the implication is those who follow Jesus, those who listen to his words and conform our lives to his teaching, we will shine. It is of the very nature of what a disciple does, and in so doing, we will guide and lead and bring to safety those who are around us. And Jesus says we're not to hide this light under a bushel or a bushel basket. Now, if he was speaking these days, I think he'd use a different illustration. I think the most amazing thing about a mobile phone is the torch. I love the torch that's on my phone, because the amount of times that you're somewhere and going, I can't quite see what's going on, and then you whack the torch on, and it's brilliant. You can see what's going on. I don't know if anybody else delights and celebrates in the addition of the torch to the phone. The problem is that every so often I'm walking around and somebody goes up to me and goes, your torch is on, because there's a light shining out of my breast pocket, or even more weirdly, coming out of my trouser pocket. I'm not saying anything. Now, the problem is that a torch that's on in your pocket is of no use to anyone. All it's doing is draining your battery. If Jesus was alive today, he would not say, don't put your lamp under a bushel, because none of us would have a clue what he was talking about. What he'd say is, don't have your torch on in your pocket. It's pointless. It doesn't do anything. It's good for nothing and useless. There is no point of a torch in your pocket. That is what we are being told. Our light is there to be useful, to be helpful, so that we can guide and lead and bring to safety those who are around us. We are not to be pocket torches, but we are to shine outside. But what is it to shine a light? The same verse tells us. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your God who is in heaven. Glorify our God. Now, this should come as a little bit of a surprise to us, because most of us have been brought up to think that good works are actually a bad thing. You are not saved by good works. And it's true, you're not. But can I tell you, the Bible never says that. There is no verse in the Bible that says you are not saved by good works. There are verses that say you are not saved by works, but when the Bible talks about good works, they're always, well, good. They're good by definition. That's why they're called good works. We may not be saved by good works, and we aren't. If anybody wants to talk about me that afterwards, that's fine. You can look at last week's sermon. We're not saved by our works, but we are saved for good works. That's what we're saved for. There is much more to the Christian life than simply being saved. We are to live that out in good works. Again, our task is not for our benefit, but it is for the benefit of others. Now, we need to recognise that's rather a different understanding of let your light shine than our culture has. When we say let your light shine in our culture, what it means is celebrate who you are. Get yourself on Australian Idol and sing your song. Now, please don't. Don't encourage them. But let your light shine so everyone can see how amazing you are. But that's not what's going on here at all. We let our light shine by doing good for others. Not, again, as I said earlier, not so people will say, what a great person, you are the salt of the earth, but so that they will give glory to our Father is in heaven. In other words, we let our light shine for the good of others and for the good of God That's what letting our light shine means. So, what do you do? Well, have your job description. I hope the next time you're asked, what do? You'll go, I'm salt and light. Now, that should start a conversation. That's even weirder than saying I'm an Anglican priest. But how does such a description make you feel? It can seem such an overwhelming task. Salt of the earth, the light of the world. How are we supposed to do that? Does it really apply to us? But Jesus is quite clear. Yes, it does. You are the salt of the earth and light of the world. We can't subcontract this stuff out. You can't give your offertory and say that Richard and Cliff and Christopher and Katrina are all going to be the salt and light for me. Now, we welcome your offertories, but you can't subcontract it out. It's a job for all of us. It's something of who we are. But there are some things I think that are here to encourage us. Firstly, this is a job that is for each of us. We all have a job. If you come to church and go, I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do. Does God really want me? What am I supposed to do? Well, here it is. This is your job. All of us, each of us, have the dignity of working for God. God has not only saved you, he's given this amazing, responsible position in his kingdom to you, to each of us. There's not premium salt and the less worthy salt. There's not the high-vis light and the, halogen or whatever is the old thing. All of us, the same role. Salt and light. If you ever think to yourself, what does God want me to do? Well, there you go. There's your answer. He wants us to be salt and light, working for the good of our community to the glory of God. Secondly, remember that these words about salt and light come straight after the words of blessing for those who humbly follow Jesus. We are to be salt and light as those who already know that the kingdom is ours and that we have that great hope for the future. The best way to lose saltiness is to lose hope. If you lose hope, you will look a lot less salty, and you will certainly be a lot less shiny. One of my favourite quotes that some of you will have heard me say before, Nietzsche said, if you want me to believe in your saviour, you need to look a lot more saved. Thirdly, the role of spirit, of salt and light is what Jesus has saved you for. It is what we are to be as Christians. It's not an added responsibility. My job is not to get you across the line in terms of salvation and then try to teach you what it is to be salt and light. The very nature of being saved, of knowing we are God's children, of knowing that we are part of God's kingdom means that we are salt and light. We are not to try really hard to be salt and light, to exercise our spiritual muscles, to push out a few more grains or to shine a bit brighter. Rather, we come back to Jesus and listen to him and learn from him. Let his teaching transform us and change our life, peppering our life with Bible teaching and recharging our spirits with the wonder of the salvation that we have in Jesus Christ. That's how we become salt and light. That's how we become saltier and shinier. Of course, taking communion and taking it seriously is a way in which bread and wine can lead to salt and shine. Furthermore, this is something that we are all called to do where we are. We are not called to do grand gestures, or it's not something that's only for the spiritual giants. At this point, I was tempted to get us to sing a song that I remember from Sunday school. Jesus bids us shine with a pure, clear light, like a little candle burning in the night. In this world of darkness, we too must shine. Me in my small corner, no, you in your small corner, and I in mine. We're not called to do great and wondrous things. Not everybody's supposed to fit. I couldn't be more in a corner. We're not all supposed to be having this role, but wherever you are, whatever you're doing, the church, at work, at home, in any relationship, you are called to be salt and light. I think that's what Jesus is talking about when he talks about the bushel, underneath the bushel. That idea is a very domestic scene. Wherever you are, take the lid off. Take your torch out of your pocket and let it shine. You in your small corner and I in mine. Being faithful where we are, here and now, is what we're called to do. And lastly, remember you are not alone. And this is true in many ways. Jesus, at the end of the gospel, promises that he will be with his followers always. As we seek to be salt and light, we do so with Jesus standing next to us and encouraging us. And I think we can gain confidence from looking at the past to the way in which this small group of believers has changed the world and brought good and light into the world through the Christian faith. You may also be able to think of those who have been salt and light for you. More immediately, though, Jesus, when he says you are the salt of the light, it's a plural you. Yous are the light of the world. It is as the church that we are salt and light. It is something that we do together. Again, that doesn't mean that we do this so the church will, people outside will think what a great church we are, but we do it for the glory of God. But it means as we seek to be salt and light in the world, we can support each other. We can pray for each other. We can listen to God's word together. And then we will grow as a community of living faith, profound hope, and practical love to the glory of God. So what do you do? Each of us here will have different answers to that. But as Christians, this is your job description. You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. May we together join in this great task so that the world may see our good works and give glory to our Father who is in heaven. Amen.